From money to capital, how cash grows, multiplies, and drives the modern economy. Karl Marx. Each of us deals with money every day. You receive your wages, pay for groceries, make online transfers, or invest. But money is not only a practical medium of exchange. Sometimes it starts to behave in a completely different way. Instead of disappearing in the act of purchase, it comes back to its owner, changed, increased. At that very moment, money stops being just money and becomes capital. This transformation lies at the heart of the modern economy. And although Marx wrote about it a century and a half ago, we can see examples everywhere today, on marketplaces, in startups, on crypto platforms, or even in the simple resale of concert tickets. You've surely seen how tickets for a famous artist's concert sell out within minutes. A reseller buys a ticket for €100 and sells it on for 200. The paper or QR code doesn't matter to him, it's only a temporary form. The money moves, turns into a ticket, and then returns as capital. Picture this: you go to a marketplace like Amazon and buy a new smartphone. This is the classic formula: C, M, C, commodity, money, commodity. First you sell your labor power for a wage, commodity, you receive money, M, and then you spend it on the smartphone, another commodity. Here money is only a mediator, and the final goal is the object you need for life or pleasure. Quite simply, you've exchanged your work for a use value. Now, a different case. Suppose you don't just buy one smartphone, but an entire batch in China at a wholesale price, planning to resell them later on the same marketplace at a higher price. Here the formula is M, C, M. You invested money, temporarily turned it into commodities, and then back into money, but in a larger amount. You don't need the smartphones themselves. They are only a tool in the movement of capital. The difference is clear. In the first case, you buy for personal use. In the second, you buy in order to make a profit. This is precisely how money becomes capital. So, in the modern world, money follows two different paths. In one case, it serves as a means of exchange, disappears, and turns into goods needed for life. C, M, C. In the other, it returns in an increased form and becomes capital. M, C, M. And it is exactly this second movement that forms the basis of the capitalist economy, whether in the 16th century with merchants and sea expeditions or today with crypto platforms, marketplaces, and startups. Look closely, and you'll see that capital always begins as money. This was as true in the 16th century, when the first European traders set out in search of spices and gold, as it is today with cryptocurrency platforms, startups, and venture capital funds. Take a concrete example. An investor puts €100,000 into the shares of a promising tech company. In essence, he buys a commodity, shares. After a year, the shares rise in value, and he sells them for $120,000. His money has completed a full circle, M, C, M, where M is the increased sum. The money has not just worked, it has become capital. Or imagine another scenario. A young entrepreneur takes out a bank loan, again money, rents a warehouse, and buys clothes from Turkish manufacturers. He then opens an online shop on Instagram and TikTok, sells the products at a higher price, and repays the loan with profit. Here, money does not simply act as a means of exchange, it serves as the starting impulse of capital. Why is it so important to distinguish C, M, C from M, C, M? Because in the first case, money disappears as it turns into consumer goods. For example, you buy a ticket for your favorite concert. The money is spent, you get emotions, and the story ends there. In the second case, the money comes back, changed, increased. The difference lies in the goal. C, M, C, to satisfy needs, to live, eat, enjoy. M, C, M, to multiply money, to create capital, business, investment, trade. Think about today's world. Every marketplace, every crypto platform, every cafe in your neighborhood exists only because someone, somewhere, has started the process M, C, M. People have put money forward in order to get it back in greater quantity. For example, a young investor buys Bitcoin for €30,000. 6 months later, the price rises, and he sells it for $35,000. In essence, he has exchanged 30,000 for 35,000. Again, the formula M, where M is the increased sum. The money has completed its cycle and returned with profit. And in these very simple examples lies the whole logic of capital, understandable to everyone. Now, let's look at examples from the world of real estate. When Marx writes that capital begins with a collision of property and money, he means the situation where someone owns land or a house, a fixed property, and someone else has the money that allows this property to be used or turned into a source of profit. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it looked like this. A landowner had an estate, and a merchant or moneylender came with money. This money could take the form of monetary patronage, for example, loans to the owner so he could maintain his estate or finance a war. Commercial capital, money invested in selling agricultural products from the estate. Usurious capital, money lent at interest. Modern examples. Imagine there is an owner of a building in the city center. He owns the property, but in order to earn a profit from it, he needs money for renovations, to attract tenants, to build a business. 1. Monetary patronage. An investor gives the building owner money for renovations and, in return, gets a share of the rental income. The money starts to work through the property. 2. Trading capital. Someone buys a flat for 200,000 euros, renovates it, and sells it on for 250,000. Here, the property acts like a commodity and the money follows the movement M, money, commodity, more money. 3. Usury capital. A bank grants a mortgage loan. The buyer doesn't have the full amount to purchase the flat but really wants to become an owner. The bank makes its money work by charging interest. That's how money turns into capital, and the property becomes the stage for this process. In other words, the collision lies in the fact that property itself is passive. A house or a piece of land doesn't automatically become capital on its own. But as soon as money starts to use this property, through renting, selling, or lending, it takes on the form of capital. Basically, every mortgage contract, every office rental, every flat resale is a clear example of the clash between money and property that Marx talked about. Let's look at the figure of a landlord, a particularly vivid example that perfectly reflects Marx's idea. Imagine our protagonist owns a business center in a big city. They don't work there, they don't need the offices. But they have a property, large, expensive, immovable. For the building to generate income, it needs money for renovations, advertising, utilities, legal paperwork. Our protagonist doesn't have all the required capital. This is where an investor steps in. The investor puts money into the renovation of the building. The facade is updated, a modern co-working space is created, smart heating systems are installed. In the end, the offices are rented out to tech companies and startups. What happened here? For the landlord, the property only became a source of income thanks to the money. For the investor, money turned into capital because it returns each month in increased form through rent. A simplified scheme. 1. The landlord owns a building, it's a property with only a dead value on its own. 2. The investor puts in money, making the building attractive to tenants. 3. The money flows back to the investor through rent, but now with profit. In other words, money property as a commodity/tool, more money, the classic M formula. To sum it up, every landlord in 2025 is someone whose activity brings property and money together. And right there you can see the transformation of money into capital in its purest form. The investment comes back multiplied. Here's an even simpler and closer to home example. The story of a rental flat. Our main character bought a flat in a new building in 2020 for 150,000 euros. She never planned to live there. She already had her own place. Her goal from the start was different: to turn money into capital. What does she do? 1. She invests money in the flat, purchase and renovation. 2. She rents it out for 800 euros a month. 3. This money flows back every month, and in 15 to 20 years the rent will fully cover the original investment and begin to bring pure profit. From Marx's perspective, the property, the flat, creates nothing on its own. It just stays empty if no money is put into motion. The money invested in the purchase only starts to work when the flat generates income through rent. The scheme therefore looks like this. MCM. Money flat as a special form of commodity. More money. Another current example. Many young people in Europe rent a flat because they can't yet afford a mortgage. For them, rent is an expense, money that disappears with no return. For the landlord, it's the very same rent, but from the opposite angle. The money invested in the property comes back every month and creates profit. You can clearly see that the same action, renting a flat, looks completely different depending on the side. For the tenant, it's simply C. C. They sell their labor, receive wages, and spend them on housing. For the landlord, it's M. The process of turning money into capital. How profit appears in trade. When you go to a market, enter a shop, or open a platform like Amazon or eBay, it might feel as if there's some kind of magic of profit. But if you strip away random factors, discounts, promotions, sudden demand, and look at the essence of exchange, you'll notice something very simple. Normally, exchange is always an exchange of equivalence. That is, I give my product, which contains a certain amount of labor. In return, I receive money or another product that contains the same amount of labor. Value doesn't grow or shrink. It just changes its form. First a commodity, then money, then another commodity. It's like swapping a 100-pound note for two 50s. The value stays the same, only the shell changes. Example 1. Online sales. You sell an old iPhone on eBay for €300 and use the money to buy a tablet. In this exchange, you gain utility. The iPhone was useless to you, the tablet isn't. But in terms of exchange value, nothing changes. One equivalent is swapped for another. Example 2. Supermarket. You walk into a shop with €20 and buy groceries. Your gain is that you now have food instead of banknotes. For the shop, it's the opposite. They now have money instead of bread and milk that could spoil. Both of you gain in usefulness, but the value in money terms has only changed its form. Condillac's mistake. The French philosopher Condillac believed that in every exchange, each person gains more than they give. It sounds appealing, but in reality, he confused two very different dimensions. Use value, the usefulness for a specific person. Exchange value, the amount of socially necessary labor contained in the product. A simple example. You have a PlayStation at home that you no longer use. Your neighbor has a bicycle that they don't need either. You swap the items. For you, the benefit is the bike. For them, the console. In terms of usefulness, you're both happy. But in terms of value, it was only an exchange of equivalence. There's no magic profit in the pure act of swapping. How this repeats today. Even now, many economists and business bloggers claim trade creates value. Business adds value to a product. In reality, trade doesn't create value, it only shifts it and gives it a different form. Coffee example. You buy beans directly from a farmer for €10. A cafe sells an espresso made from those same beans for €3 a cup. It looks as if the cafe has created value. But in fact, it has only added the barista's labor, rent, advertising, design, everything included in the final price. Profit in trade doesn't arise from the exchange itself, but from the organization of labor and the use of capital. The takeaway. In a normal exchange, nobody cheats anyone and no surplus value appears. Both sides only gain in usefulness. One gives away what they no longer need, the other gets what they want. But the value itself stays the same. It simply changes form, first a commodity, then money, then another commodity. That's why Marx said, where equality reigns, there is no profit. Merchant capital. Buy cheap, sell dear. Marx writes, the formula M, buying in order to sell dearer, is most clearly seen in the movement of merchant capital. Picture a ticket reseller for a famous artist's concert in 2025. They buy tickets for €100 and sell them on for 200. For them, the tickets aren't the goal, only an interim step. The invested money must return in a larger amount. But where does the gain come from? Within the act of exchange it cannot arise, because, as Marx wrote, the sum of values put into circulation cannot grow by itself. For profit to appear, someone has to lose, either the buyer, who pays more, or the producer, who sells too cheaply. That's why the trader appears here as a parasitic middleman. Just as Marx said when quoting Franklin, "War is nothing but robbery, trade, deception, and fraud. Interest capital, money. This shows itself even more clearly in lending. Marx stressed, the formula M, C, M reduces to its two extremes M, money for a larger amount of money, which contradicts the nature of money itself. Example, mortgage. A bank lends a family 200,000 euros to buy a house, but demands 300,000 in return. Here, money seems to multiply by itself. Aristotle condemned this long ago. People hate the moneylender, and rightly so, for here money becomes a means of gain and is not used for the purpose for which it was created. Originally, money was only a medium of exchange for goods. With interest, it turns into a method of making money from money. The producer and the limits of labor. Can surplus value be created outside the market? Marx answers no. The producer can create value through labor, but no value that grows by itself. Imagine a shoemaker who buys leather for 50 euros and makes a pair of boots. Their work adds new value. Now the boots can be sold, say, for 100 euros. But the leather hasn't magically increased in price. It has simply absorbed the labor of the shoemaker. In other words, value grows only because old labor is supplemented by new labor. But for money to turn into capital, more is required. The money invested in the product must come back in an increased amount. The condition for money to become capital. Here Marx leads us to a key point. Our money owner, who is still only a chrysalis of a capitalist, must first buy commodities at their real value, sell them at their real value, and yet draw more value from the circulation than he put in. The task seems paradoxical. Profit has to appear both inside and outside the sphere of exchange. The capitalist must participate in an honest exchange of equivalents, and somehow still extract surplus value. This is the very secret of capital that Marx later begins to uncover. 21st century examples. 1. Merchant capital. Marketplaces like Amazon. Sellers buy in bulk from producers and sell at a higher price to end customers. The profit doesn't come out of thin air but from unequal exchange. The buyer pays above value. The producer receives less. 2. Interest capital. Banks and microloans. Money generates money without material labor. Just as in the 19th century, people take loans and pay them back with interest. 3. Labor and value. A programmer writes code for an app. The program sells for more than the cost of the laptop and electricity. The surplus value doesn't come from the laptop itself, but from the programmer's labor embodied in the product. In the 19th century, Marx described what we now observe everywhere in the 21st. In an honest exchange of equivalents, there is no source of profit. Profit in trade or lending doesn't arise within the commodity, but in specific social relations. Money only becomes capital when inequality enters the process, through the market, credit, or the hiring of other people's labor. Money becomes capital when it completes a full cycle and returns in an increased form, and this very process drives the modern economy. If you understand the difference between simple exchange and the transformation of money into capital, you'll start to see banks, renting, trade, and even your own finances in a completely new way. Understanding how money becomes capital changes the way you see trade, investment, and even your own finances. Profit does not arise from a simple exchange of goods. It comes from the cycle that brings money back in greater quantity. Once you grasp this hidden movement, from cash to capital, you begin to see the real forces shaping business, banking, and the world around you.